anyone who's new to office hours. And first and foremost, I'll say that my name is Jessa. I'm here with Kinsey. We're co-founders of Ride IQ, and we're also here with our partners in Ride IQ, Kyle and Jen Carter, who are also coaches in Ride IQ, and they're both 5-star event riders. So quickly, what office hours is office hours are weekly events where we take a deep dive into an equestrian topic with an expert in the topic. And the topic this week is how to warm up properly, which of course is a pretty universal topic. And that's why we're making this public. And we are going to get into some questions that we got ahead of this, but also you're more than welcome to ask questions using the chat feature. So right now we're going live to YouTube, we're going live to Facebook, both a private group and a public group. And you can use the comments in the Facebook thread or the chat in the YouTube live stream. And Kinsey and I will be moderating the whole time so we can relay your questions and comments to Kyle and Jen so they can address those. And also, please feel invited to just say hello in the chat too. Tell us where you're tuning in from, anything that you'd like. This is a very casual forum. So thank you for taking the time to be here with us tonight. And with that, I'll say thank you especially to Kyle and Jen for taking the time to be here tonight and teach us more about how to warm up properly.
Well, thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Pretty excited about this.
Sorry. I was just saying, for anyone who's watching, I'm moving Kyle and Jen to the big screen now, so you don't have to look at my face anymore.
Pretty excited about this because it's a topic that I feel really strongly about, and I have for years. I just wrote an article for Ride IQ that was in the USEA eventing magazine, and so we had some questions of it on because that was a public thing, not just a Ride IQ thing. And so we had some questions about it. We just decided that we wanted to just dig a little deeper into it because the article gave sort of some thoughts on the warming up and what I feel should happen and why I think it's so important and everything. But it was not like I could be very specific in it without writing a book, which is a chapter in a book that I'm trying to write at the moment. So first of all, I think the warming up is something that as you mature, you start to realize the value of it more. When I was younger, I remember one of my coaches yelling at me for just riding around the outside of the arena, get ready for a jump lesson, just going in and trotting around and cantering around the outside of the arena. She was like, you need to put feet everywhere in the arena on the floor, which is part of with Ride IQ with our rides. We try to get people really using everything underneath them and their horse, their terrain, and their rings, and trying to get them to use their space correctly. As I got better coaches, I remember riding into the ring with Jonathan Aslin, who was a member of the Canadian show jumping team. It was back when I was doing jumper as a junior jumper, and I was late for a lesson because I notoriously am late, and I rode into the ring, and his lessons were a little bit more kind of going in and then just starting to do the jump school. I rode in and kind of started to just immediately pick up trot and canter, and he was like, no, just because you're late, you don't get to punish the horse for that behavior. You have to go through the walk, the trot, the canter, and build them up to the jumping. So showing up for a lesson on time was obviously not the correct thing to do. Now I was, I don't know, 16 to 18, somewhere in there. So it stuck with me though. I've taken a lot of lessons, and I was like a little ashamed that I did it, and was, just, it opened my eyes to that a little bit. And then at the same time I was riding with another coach. These are both when I was riding at Spruce Meadows. So Albert Cly was there as the riding master, and he used to make us go. I did 3 lessons a week with him. I was very, very lucky with my parents trying to support making an incompetent rider into a somewhat competent rider. And Albert would make us do 45 minutes to an hour of flat every time we rode before we were allowed to jump. He was very German. He was very methodical, and it was awesome because it really got the horses not just loose and ready to work, but if you made a decision, the horse was able to actually respond to it. And I think more importantly, what it did is it made me aware of the fact that by riding that horse for an hour and 15, an hour and 20 minutes, after doing that for several years, my horses were just really fit, strong. They held up better. I didn't have a lot of soundness issues. I was unaware that's why it was happening at the time. I just thought I was some sort of genius in how horses stayed sound. But it was really based upon that premise of that, making sure the horse was thoroughly warmed up that helped. Partly because the horse was loose, supple, the tendons and everything were elastic, the muscles were elastic, the horse's minds were ready for the work. And the other part being is it strengthened them over time. So, the value of it is just tenfold. And one of the reasons that is the reason that I'm pretty passionate about it. Like when I go to a lesson, I'm not as bad about it anymore, or good about it, I should say. But it used to be when people show up for lessons and they would just show up to ride, and I would be like, I'd chastise them, I'd explain all of this, and I'd try to get them to do the whole thing. Need to be, 20 minutes should be the minimum before you start jumping, I think. And typically it wasn't always received terribly well. I do think we created some very good horse people at that time, but you get kind of sick of, trying to push people and them just kind of looking at you because they don't really want to do that part of it. And so I don't harp on people as much. I make a point of it, but in the end, I can't change people's behavior. So this hopefully will help you understand why, the facts of why I think it's important. So just again, before we get to the questions and the crux of it, I witness a lot of people doing just that, showing up to jump, and it's like, oh, today's jump day, and they just go and get right to it. And top riders, so don't think I'm saying this and these people aren't good riders. Like I know multiple 5-star riders that used to come cross-country schooling at our farm, and they would get out of the trailer, tack them up, and they'd ride out to our front field, and by the time we're at the front field, they were starting to jump already. And it shocked me when I first saw it, because I assumed everybody that rode at the top level would go through this whole process that I would go through, which is we walk for a bit, then we trot, start working on circles, then we canter, we do some transitions, we go forward, bring them together, all that. So I just assumed everybody was doing the same thing. And then I realized that there was a lot of successful people that actually were avoiding the warm-up. And a couple of them I'm friends with, and so I sort of quizzed them on it because I'm always curious what people's thoughts are on it, and they just felt like they might as well just get to jumping. But it's funny because, and I said this to them after kind of having the discussion, I was like, the day of Kentucky, when you're going to go to show jump, you're not going to go and just go jump fences. You're guaranteed that day you're going to walk, you're going to trot, you're going to canter, then you're going to start jumping. Cross country, you're not going to just go out and start jumping those fences. You're going to go through, a lot of times at Kentucky, we'll get on those horses in the morning, warm them up, get them really loose in their bodies, put them away, bring them back out, and warm up for cross country. And because you're trying to get the whole horse prepared. And so if you're not going to do it on the biggest day, you probably shouldn't do it, because that it's not the right thing on the biggest day. You probably want to practice what you're going to actually do with the horse. And that's my feeling with it. I think there's a lot of things that you can fix in your jumping and in your riding just by how you warm them up. And so we kind of try to do that, a process with all of them. If I'm jumping a horse and I'm like on our younger horses and I'm busy and I don't have a lot of time for it, they'll go out usually and trot with some kids that ride with me, or they'll do a little flat with them, and then I'll get on them. And typically I'll get on them and I won't be happy with the place the horse is in mentally, because it's not my horse yet. And that's, to me, what we're trying to achieve is, what is your horse? Who is it that you're trying to ride into that arena on the big day? Who is it you're trying to jump on the day? A lot of times you're coming around to a fence, and if the horse isn't properly prepared in the warm-up, your first multiple jumps are not terribly well executed. And I will say, I keep saying about the jumping, but the warm-up for dressage is super important. But in my time doing this as a professional, I've noticed that people usually warm up for dressage. And the only reason I think that they do that more, strategically is because in dressage you get penalties for not performing the movement in a correct manner. And in show jumping, you get penalties that maybe you're not even aware that it was because you didn't perform it correctly, and you get a rail down and then you wonder why you had the rail. And on cross country, horse comes out of the box and backs off and stops at the first fence because you never had it in front of your leg in the warm-up, and everybody's pissed off because the horse stopped at the first jump. And everything you're trying to do is find your best horse. So in that, what I want you to think about in your warm-ups is a couple of things. What horse do you want to be sitting on? What is your horse's best place to be mentally and physically before it performs? So I wrote a couple of notes down before starting this on a few different horses, and that would be more or less. And so more warm up or less warm up. I have one horse I'm doing at the moment that's a really lovely horse, but if I'm on him for dressage for more than 15 minutes, he starts getting a little more anxious and I start losing movement. So I have to go to the ring a little bit early with him, which means I usually try, if I can, to ride him once in the morning before he goes to his work, because I want him to be loose. But mentally, that horse doesn't deal very well with a long, extended warm-up. And he's the sort of horse that when we bought him, I was certain that was going to be the fix for him. And I mean, he does do a lot of walking and I spend a lot of time on him, but on the day at the show, he does not perform well if I spend a ton of time on him. So I reduce what I do with him. On that, the type of warm-up. He would be sort of a multiple ride horse. I had a very good horse a few years ago that I rode advanced, that at horse trials always did mediocre on the flat and always did exceptionally well at the FEI events. Well, at the FEI events, typically, especially at that time of my life, I would have like 2 horses at the show. And so for that horse, I could sit on her for a long time. She'd get ridden about 3 times before I'd ride her dressage test, because she was a very uptight horse. And so I would be on her for probably 2 hours to her dressage test in accumulation, not at one time. My Madison Park horse, who was always difficult on the flat, when I first started riding him, he was below 50% on the flat with the previous rider. They couldn't get him to get a qualifying score, which is why they sold him. And he's super talented, but he's obnoxious. He's arrogant. He's playful. He plays in a very high entertainment for him area, which is rearing, bucking, spinning, and just cavorting. And so when I got him in, I would go and I would get on him and I'd take him out for like a 20-minute ride, and he would rear, spin, do all of that, and I would just ignore him. I just let him play and do all that stuff. And previously, I think they thought he was behaving badly, and they would try to stop him from doing it. And for me, I was like, he's like a kid in a car seat. He just has so much energy, he can't stop himself. And this is just how he expresses himself. So I'd do that, let him play. It was a bit, out of hand sometimes. And then I'd take him back to the stall and I'd pull him out for his test. And he would always behave very well for his test then. The trick with him was not putting him in that box and making him perform. The warm-up was about him being able to just mentally let loose and get in the right place. And because then he was able to do that, he was happy about focusing. And when we started working with more dressage trainers, a lot of times they would have me, really put a lot of pressure on him, make him, because he could really perform. And I was happy to do this stuff, and I would make him, physically really work hard and mentally work. And it actually challenged him, and his dressage marks went down. And the whole time my remedy was to do more and try to work on it and fix it. And then when he had a pretty significant injury that we had to give him time down for about 8 months. And when I brought him back from it, I went about it a different way completely. And the warm up I found for him, and this was at So in 2010, so I mean, he was probably 12 years old when I found the warm up that really worked for him. And it was at the World Championships. I was in the warm up for cross country. They had a hold on the course. And I'm walking around the warm up. Michael Young's in there with Sam. Andrew Nicholson's in there with, I think he was on Nero. And I'm walking, talking to Andrew Nicholson, and Parker's doing his thing, which I just ignore because that's just what you did with them. And we're walking around. It's going on for a while, and Michael Young's standing over in the corner, standing beside his horse on the ground, and they're just letting him, kind of hang out. Andrew's horse is pretty chill. I'm like looking at Michael Young. I'm thinking, if I get off this horse, because we don't know how long it's going to be, and I'd like to be off of him, but if I get off him, I don't know if I'm going to be able to get back on him because he's so absolutely full of himself. So we walked for probably, we'd already warmed up a bit, but I was on him walking for about 45 minutes, maybe 50 minutes. And all of a sudden he kind of went like, all right then. And he just walked around like an old hack horse. And then he was very good. He went to, actually had to wake him up to go to the start box, which was unusual for him. He usually went to the start box rearing and, behaving, a bit much. And I had to kind of sharpen him up because I was worried things weren't going to go quite right. But I remember coming off that and finishing that weekend and talking to David about it, David O'Connor, who was our coach at the time. I said, next year at Kentucky, I know exactly what I'm going to do. I'm going to go down to that warm-up, and he's going to be down there for half a day. I'll take some feed, everything, and I'll just go down there. And my warm-up will just be getting him to meditate and get a bit in the Zen moment for his test instead of trying to ride him to it. And unfortunately, he didn't get back there for a couple of years, but everywhere he went sort of in the next stage of his career, he was such a better horse for how I then warmed him up. But I don't think it would have worked when he was younger. So my point being is you have to be open to the idea as well. Your athlete changes as your warm-up changes for your athlete. So the horse that I'm saying right now only takes 15 minutes. As he progresses, he might need more warm-up. And as a horse that needed a ton of warm-up might end up reducing, which happens as well. And you have to be open to letting them tell you how they wish to be handled and ridden. And with that, you need to go to enough places that aren't like a big deal to be competitive at while you're trying to ascertain what the best approach is to that warm-up. So that's a mental end of the warm-up. But when you're thinking of a warm-up, and this is how, I think I would want to approach it, is you're trying to get all of that, all those body parts limber, moving softly. So when you bend to the right to turn right, they actually wrap around your leg, and you're not pushing them to try to get them to wrap around your leg. When you come, to the jump or to say a medium trot movement in the corner, when you stretch up and take a half halt, you feel their back actually lift to you and their hind leg come through because everything's soft enough to do that. And when you're coming to the jump and you think, I'm going to wait, the same thing. The horse politely listens to your aids because in the previous 30 minutes, you've worked on making those aids softer and softer and softer. Now, when you go in the ring and you compete, you have to deal with whatever's going on at the moment. But the goal should be, before you arrive at that arena, to have your best partner underneath you. Some horses need to be, woken up. Some horses need to be quieted down. But in the end, they all deserve to be stretched out and truly made elastic. So the process to arrive at that, we use a Beamer blanket on our horses now, and that helps sort of start the process, I would say. But it doesn't replace time in the tack, giving the horse a chance to walk for 5 or 10 minutes. You'll see in a lot of our ride IQ lessons, everything that's a normal ride, the professionals are always walking for a good period of time before they start into their trot, into their canter. Again, some horses are better if you canter before you trot. Some horses are so obnoxious in the walk, you kind of want to get right to work. You do have to deal with your horse in the appropriate manner. You can't just sort of put them all into one box. But when you're suppling and getting all of those things loose, you think about the elasticity, the amount of power a horse has when you go to a jump, or when you ask for a canter flying change, or even a medium canter to a collected canter, the amount of power that's going on underneath you, all that power can be put up and through and create elevation um, and engagement, or it can be pushed into the ground, causing, over time joint issues, sometimes ligament tendon issues, things like that. And so your goal is to think of the warm up in a all inclusive. It's a fitness thing, it's a mental warm up, and then it's also a body preparation thing, which is really at the very base, I think, the most important part. Because if I don't get my horse's brain in the right place, that sucks. It's not a great day. But if my horse's body isn't in the right place, I can do damage to them, whether it's apparent damage or not. The lack of warming up is going to limit over time, I believe, a horse's athleticism and their longevity in a career. And we've had pretty good luck here with keeping horses sound for a long period of time, and working with older horses. And I think with the older horse, you see it so much more apparently, because they carry those restrictions that they had when they were younger. But like, older athletes, the same thing. It takes longer to get the body prepared. The mind can say, I want to do this, but my brother said to me one time a couple of years ago, when I was harboring an injury and he had done a knee or something, he said, you know what the leading cause of injury in older athletes is? And I was like, well, I was waiting for something profound, because he skis, and he was like, and it wasn't profound at all. He was like, yeah, them forgetting that they're older athletes and not younger athletes anymore. Your injuries come back quicker when you're younger. Your body doesn't get injured as easily when you're younger. And so if you think about the damage you do to a young athlete by not maybe taking care of the warm up, that damage will limit them later in their life. And I wholeheartedly believe that. And so you have to find, let's say you have that 15-minute horse that warms up in 15 minutes and goes to the ring, and that's how they're best prepared. You still owe it to them to have them do something to get their body loosened up earlier in the day, or a walk or something. It's vital to their longevity. And I don't think everybody would agree with that, but it is amazing how people don't practice that intent. Every one of them probably would read that article I wrote and be like, yeah, that's right. But 10 of them will show up for a lesson and not have actually done a thing with the horse before they showed up. The responsiveness isn't there. The body's not there. The mind's not there. The performance isn't there. And if you like your partner, you owe it to them to kind of go through that process. Yeah, I don't know. So I guess there's just I said something about the jump, the dressage, and the cross country. They all do have different degrees of warm up. And you have to, again, pick what works for your horse. The course matters. The type of course you're going to prepare for. If your show jumping course is really tight and small, you'd better have worked those circles in the warm up to get them, really moving their feet. You can't just canter around, loping around, and go into the ring and expect a performance. So your warm up should match the performance you expect for cross country, dressage, or show jumping. Temperature matters. Obviously, right now we're in Florida. It's really hot here. All of our horses are doing less work than they normally do at this time. We've backed our upper level horses down, but we are doing our warm ups and then less jumping. And we're trying to take care of it that way. Maybe we do more days in the week, but less actual intensity while we're doing it, because it's the only fair thing to do, because you're not trying to torture them. And then conditions. If you've got mud, if it's raining, if it's cold, it takes a little longer to warm up a horse in the cold. And if it's cold and they're really fresh, you might stick them on a lunge line to help get rid of it. I don't believe in, I say get rid of it, but I don't believe in that, like, stick them on the lunge line for 45 minutes because, look, you're working their body and you're taking the wind out of their sails, and then they won't be difficult to deal with. I think you have to manage an athlete, and I'm not looking for my horses to be, plodding along. I'm looking for them to go in and brighten up and be responsive, be a bit electric, because that's what I'm going to expect out of them when I get into a big ring. In another 10 years, I'm going to guess I'm going to be looking for plodding around. I'm not going to want to deal with the other part of it, in the extremes. But you do have to take conditions into your warm-up. So as you're preparing your horse for the competition at, we go up, say, to Georgia in the winter and it's freezing cold and it's warm down here. Our horses have a major change in how they deal with things. And so we actually plan the warm-up around that. Not to say we get it right all the time, but we definitely get that in mind, because you try to do everything you can to make that horse ready, which in colder weather, you're more likely to get little muscle tears and things like that. So you have to be really conscious of getting that body ready. And if you go to any true athletic outing, human, my kids run, we run, I've swum, I've been competitively, I've fenced. We never did a single practice without this big stretching and moving and all of this, but it's hard to stretch a horse. The best way to stretch a horse is actually using the ride to do it, because you can physically manipulate them, but you don't get as much done on them doing that. So you do have to factor that in. Your horse athlete needs this as much warm up, but is a much different type of, it's got to be somewhat different than human, because humans can be physically manipulated easier. So that's my premise of it. But the idea was that we were going to have some questions that I could maybe specifically answer.
That's amazing. We just got a comment that said, and I'm sorry, I don't know who it's from, because we're getting comments sent to us through the platform we're using, but it says Kyle's ability to talk about a subject nonstop for literal hours is so impressive to me. She or he said I could listen to him all day though. So I think that was a great way to preface the conversation. We have a ton of questions that have come in. I think this office hours might run a little bit over the hour, so we can get to as many as we can. But that all makes complete sense. One thing that I was thinking while you were describing it is, I think thinking back on my own experience, I wasn't in the mindset of experimenting with the warm up and what made my horse go the best that he could. And in my case, the horse that I rode most recently, his name was Fozzie, and his owner, Yvonne Lucas, when I met Fozzie, was like, he goes best if you let him go really long and low, walk, trot, and canter for 20 minutes. And so that was handed to me, but not a lot of people don't have that information handed to them. So they have to do the experimenting and kind of figure it out. And I think that's just part of what we're trying to learn today, and learn about all the different variables to consider as you warm up plan. So it was Courtney just says that was me, Courtney, always listening intently to the pros. We love you, Courtney. So glad you're here. So with that, I had one quick clarification question, and then I'll let Kinsey jump into the questions that we've gotten. You mentioned 20 minutes ago that a 20-minute warm up for jumping is about the minimum that you would recommend. Does that number include walking?
For us, usually I don't include the walk from the barn to the ring. No. So for us, our rings are a little further away from the house, or from the barn. So it goes, they're probably 5 minutes in by the time you get there. Kentucky, it's an 8-minute walk from that barn to the ring, and you need to know how long it takes you, so you know to add that onto your warm up. So I consider the 20 minutes the actual work.
And I think it's important to know every horse is individual as well. Some horses get more jazzed up the longer you walk them if you're at a show. And obviously there's different warm-ups for lessons. There's different warm-up for show settings. But some horses, you're going to do more damage if you just walk them and they get themselves in a state. So it's really specific to a horse.
Yeah.
So it's hard to be, you can be general, but you do have to know your horse and know what works.
Yeah, that makes sense. So we've talked a bit about show warm-up and kind of how you've handled the different phases on a variety of horse types. How do you think about warming up at home? So whether that's just riding, like you're riding by yourself, or you're warming up for a lesson, are you like pretty much on every horse trying to do 20 minutes? Is that like kind of the right amount to think about? Are there certain things like elements that should be included in every warm up at home, no matter what? How should people be thinking about that?
I think the thing is the warm up for riding at home is so much less stress because seriously, when you're at the show, look, it matters. It really matters. So you screw up a warm up on a horse for dressage and it can cost you 5 penalties. I've done it multiple times, and I'll do it more. Same thing for the show jumping or the cross country. You can do too much. Lots of times I get out on course, I'll be like, oh, probably should have done a little more, or I didn't need to do that. You know, you get suckered into this like, oh, the horses feel so good in the warm up because it's a nice horse. He's well behaved. You get out on course, you realize you never got him in front of your leg. You know, things slip past you sometimes, and that's fine. But that's part of the learning curve going forward with them.
And you have to factor in at a show, you've got other horses in the ring with you. You've got so many different factors than you typically probably don't have at home. So that kind of could throw a curveball at you.
Yeah, and be creative. Like if you got one that's bad in traffic with other horses, in Florida we're lucky because the footing's really good in everywhere. So we'll warm one up in the over where the trailers park because the footing's good there, and it just keeps the tension down before you have to put them in that environment. With that as well, from the show to home, I look at the stuff I do at home as trying to figure out what I might want to do to get a horse prepared at a show. Like that's my whole goal, is I'm warming up at home so I can put the best warm up together for that horse when I get to a show. And every time I go out, I'll do a standard with the horse, and I will then try to remember, and often I have to write it down because there's a lot of horses here. Oh, this horse really seems to benefit from this. But again, it does change. So the stuff at home is purely it is a fitness thing. It's all those, it's the getting the body ready, but it's also fact-finding mission. Oh, when I did this in the dressage, the horse really came up and through. At the show, I'm going to do it within the, maybe I'll change how I do it, but I'm going to try and achieve the same result.
One of the questions that we got, and I'm not sure if you're going to be able to be this prescriptive because of all the variables, but the question is, how many minutes of walk, trot, and canter before jumping, and how do you keep them from getting bored? And I would just add, like, obviously there are a lot of variables, but if there are too many variables to answer that question, maybe just describe like a warm up that if you did see a student do it before a jump lesson, you'd be like, that seems good and sufficient.
5-minute walk. I mean, that would be the minimum. 5-minute walk to start the horse on a long rein, ideally, just so that they can kind of let their whole top line go. Then I think 10, 12 minutes of trot work before the canter happens, but there are a lot of horses that canter better early. So you have to let them kind of work through that. And a massage therapist physical therapist I was talking to a couple of years ago, she used to do the Canadian team and the American team. She said at the canter, every muscle gets worked. At the trot, not every muscle gets worked. So the canter is the best way to loosen them up. So I take that to, going to the canter early isn't the worst thing in the world. I mean, it's not normally what we do, but I shouldn't say it's not the worst thing in the world. It's actually probably just fine. So that part of it, I say 12 minutes of trot, but that part doesn't matter. But then looking at being sort of 15 to 20 minutes of actual work, which is added on after the walk. How do I keep them from getting bored? That's my job. Look, if you go to school, I always say this to people and they're riding, if you go to school and your professor sits there and he has a monotone voice and he says nothing of interest, but he gets to the facts, you're probably not going to do very well in that. Their job is to engage you. Well, this is far more important than that. Your job is to entertain that horse and make them desire to be involved with you. So a really lazy, laid-back horse needs enough transitions to make them attentive. And every day they need enough transitions. And what's enough transitions? I read an article by DeComfy recently, and I'm sure I butchered his name, And I think he said something like, if you're not doing 40 transitions in 2 minutes, then you're not doing your job. Now, a transition doesn't have to be walk trot. A transition can be, positioning, half halt to a more collected trot, then forward, and just constantly keeping them, attentive to you. Some horses, the opposite's true. I mean, in the barn right now, we've got this wide spectrum of horses, and they're really talented. But like the one horse, it's all about just letting his neck out and letting him just be down there and not actually putting a lot of information into what I'm doing with him, because he behaves better that way. He performs better that way. And then I have to find a way to bring that to the ring. And that's my next goal, which I don't know if I'm going to be successful, but boy, it's interesting. I'm that interested. I wake up every morning and it's the horse I want to sit on. I can't wait to jump him. I can't wait to do stuff with him, because he's the most difficult Rubik's Cube I've got in the barn. So he's the one that I'm drawn to. But at the same time, he's making me that interested. I'm making him that interested in what I have to say. And that's the goal. Now with him, getting him interested is getting him to just relax and allow me to guide him. And then at the other end, I've got a beautiful young horse I'm doing that my job is to get out there and in the first 5 minutes be like, come on now, pay attention. Lots of transitions, lots of circles, lots of different things. So he starts to go, what, you're asking me to do stuff, instead of asking and not receiving an answer. You pick up the phone, they got to pick up the other end.
Yeah, and transitions are something that that wasn't on my radar, something I should be doing a lot of in my warm-ups. I feel like I've listened to 300, 400 Ride IQ lessons now, and I'm like, wow, I was really doing that wrong. So it's good to know.
Yeah.
Learn something new every day. So are there factors that you look for in your horses to determine if they are properly warmed up, that you can move on to the next thing? Either you can move on to like harder flat work, or you can move on to jumping. What are you looking for in order to be like, yeah, okay, they're feeling good?
It's a hard question.
Absolutely. There absolutely is. But it is that I'm looking for a feel. I could ride. You could just put me out there riding horses. I don't care if I ever compete. I love training them. I love jumping them. I love doing stuff with them. And so I'm looking for a feel. That's what I'm looking for. I'm looking for that bubble where I can feel the horse just zoning in on me and responding to what I'm asking for. And it's like a magic moment. And I look for it on every horse. And I don't get it on every horse. I certainly don't get it every time. But when you start to get that and you figure out how to create that feeling, I go for it every single day. Some people go for different things. Everybody's kind of drawn to a different element of it. But like, so Jenda, we've been married for 25 years as of yesterday, the day before. And it's not the same relationship every single day. It's not the same, oh, well, that's how Jen is, so this is how it is, or that's how Kyle is, so it is. There's a constant evolving and back and forth. And there's no different partnership with your horse. And the people that get in the biggest trouble, I think, are the ones that are get a little too, but that's my horse. And you have to warm up the individual that you're riding on the day, not the individual that you thought was going to show up for you. Because some days the wrong individual shows up and you have to deal with it. And that's fine. Just be open to it. And some days I've had it both ways. I've ridden into a ring at Radnor one time years ago, and I went down the center line, and I remember thinking, oh my God, this horse is focusing more than I am. Like, it's just like, it was like zoned in, never expected. It happened to me one time at Kentucky, going down the center line in 1999. I had a horse that was second there, but that horse went in that ring, and it was like wholly available to me. And then when I went back with Parker in 2007 as a 10-year-old or 8, I was in the warm-up, and I remember being like, I've got that feeling I'm going to win this competition. I was like, I really thought I was going to be so competitive. And he went down that ramp and all hell broke loose. He went like, he just lost it. So I couldn't ride the horse I had in the warm-up. I had to ride the new horse that was underneath me. And unfortunately, I didn't want to ride that horse, but it's all that I had available to me. That's your warm-up. I mean, that's just part of your structure. So I just don't think you can. I think you can predict, and you can see things that Like I have one horse that hates golf carts. I know if I see a golf cart, I'm going to keep him. Like I'm going to keep him focused away from as much as possible. I don't think that's going to change. And if he doesn't notice a golf cart, I'm always like, oh, he didn't notice the golf cart. That's good, but I know next time he probably will. They're not. They're predictable, and they're predictable in that they're just like humans. They change.
Exactly. That's what I was going to say. Riders get nervous when they go in the ring. Why should our horses be any different? So you have to understand and accept their personalities.
Yeah.
The people that get stuck in treating them like machines, it's hard. You have to understand they change.
And we talk about this all the time. So it's not like this isn't like, oh, here, people, let's educate you. Like, this is stuff that we're constantly going, oh, surprise. Yeah. At the ACs a couple of years ago, I have a really nice horse that's going intermediate now. He was green going prelim at that point, and he's so laid back. He's just lovely. And the last show before he went there, it's the first time I ever pushed him fast on cross country, and he was super, and he won it. And I went to the ACs, and in the warm-up for dressage, that horse bolted a couple times with me, which he'd done sometimes, but he was like, he did like 2 or 3, 4 times. Every time I brought him back, settled him, gave him a pat, did the traditional thing. And then finally he bolted with me, and I was like, you know what, whatever, let's just go with it. And I'm blasting around the dressage warm. I look like a complete yahoo. And I'm just like keeping my eyes up, yelling to people, outside, look out, going this way. I let him kind of go along for, like 5, maybe longer minutes, knowing my dressage time is getting closer, because I didn't give myself a lot of time warming him up, because he wasn't that horse that needed a lot of warm up. And finally kind of just went like, okay, got that out of my system. He went to the ring. He did a really, really good test. I remember saying to Jen afterwards, I was like, if that was one of the kids that rides with me, that horse would have started bolting, and they would have looked at me on the ground and been like, what do I do? And the trick is you have to be open to what they are. Now that comes with mileage and all that, but you can prepare yourself mentally for those moments as well.
That is funny scene to picture. But it also is a reminder that as the rider, you're the horse's current trainer. Like, looking to you on the ground, like, it is helpful to give yourself some credit and empower yourself to try to react in a way that works for your horse. We have a question in the Facebook group, and I'm so flattered because it's from Kathy Barr, who's one of our Ride IQ coaches, our natural horsemanship coach. And Kathy asked, do you have a top 4 or 5 things that you look for in general for most of your horses warming up?
Yeah. And so everybody's very, very different in what they want out of their horse. I love a light horse. I love a horse that's light in the hand, to the point of they're not actually as in the hand as they need to be for the test, that sort of thing. But I look for that moment where they give to me, where they carry themselves, and I'm not having to try to help them along. That warm up to get there, though, obviously is much different on a 4-year-old than it is on a 10 or a 12-year-old, but I expect the same feeling out of the 4-year-old. And when I get that, the 4-year-old might only be able to hold that for 4 minutes. So I probably, once I achieve it, will back down and set them aside and then take them to the ring on it. And that is lightness on the hand, lightness from the leg aids. Yeah, I don't want to be pushing them along. So those 2 things are super important to me. And then, especially when it comes to jumping, if I can't adjust them, I can't get to the jump the way I want to get to a jump. I can't create a distance. I can't solve a distance that's coming to me. So I want to make sure when I open the front door and close my leg that the horse goes, oh, go through the front door. And I want to also open the front door. I want to be able to soften and make them understand that when I soften, they don't necessarily bugger off with me just because the front door's open. And that's a big pet peeve of mine. So my horses in my warm up, I want to feel like I soften, and they stay there respectfully waiting to actually lengthen or shorten depending on what Kyle wants. And that has to happen relatively quickly. And then the balance through a turn is super important to me because I'll use a turn a lot of times to achieve a distance, to achieve a better jump. Obviously in dressage, you got to use the corners. So I want to make sure that while I'm turning, that I can feel the shadow of where my horse is going to be in 3 to 4 strides. And I want to see them follow that line that isn't there yet. And when I can start to feel that, I feel like I can ride the green horse or the experienced horse and actually get out of them what I need. And again, that depends on how long that takes. And sometimes when a horse gives that to you early, and I'm really guilty of this, I'll get a horse that does like, will be very fancy doing its work, and it'll really give to me, and I'll be sitting there like, oh my God, look what I'm getting out of it. And I'll tire them to the point when I go to the ring, there's not the same horse that I just had in the warm up. And I mean, I do that at least two times a year in a, usually on the upper level horses, because I'll get too involved in enjoying what's going on. So the being able to create a line and be able to actually lengthen and shorten. So if you have pace and you have lines, you can solve anything. But not, I can canter, but I actually own the pace, and then I own the line. And so those two things are fundamental for me in warming up a horse. What about you?
No, they got to come off the leg well. That's my most important thing. I like to not have to kick. Feel like you can just kind of hug the saddle and they're listening to you. That's what I like.
Yeah. So we just got a question in, Jessica's laughing at me. We just got a question in the YouTube asking, how do you pick which battles are for the warm up versus schooling later on?
Oh, the warm, are we talking warm up for like, I'm assuming we're talking about warm up before we're competing.
Yeah, I'm guessing it.
Jumping.
Yeah, like I'll tell you what, if I'm warming up for cross country and there's a battle that needs to be fought, I'm going to fight it. I'm going to argue. I'm going to do it on cross country as well. If I'm going out there, I used to catch ride a lot. And if I go out on cross country and it goes to bolt down to a jump, and I'm going to make a decision, and if that decision's wrong, I'm going to make that decision anyways, because I want to be listened to. And I think it's really important for me as a rider, the way that I want to ride, that they actually follow my path. For dressage, I think you have to go for, again, it comes back to this never is, we're not looking for a battle ever. I know it happens. I'm not a believer in this, like, oh, no, nothing ever goes wrong. It's all, horses are emotional as well as we are, and things go wrong sometimes. And sometimes they're having a bad day and you just kind of have to live with it. But, you're going to warm up for dressage. I personally think you always, if you know your horse is going to get worse for the argument, you don't do the argument. And if you know that you need to have the argument and have the kind of, conversation as a parent, like, hey, now enough of that, we need to get to work, and that's going to improve them, then you do that. But you should have figured that out, I believe, in the build up to your show. And then when you go to the ring, and I'm not the best at this for sure, but when you go to the ring, you should go to the ring to show the judge all the stuff you can do right. Don't try to show them how difficult your horse is. And I don't do that, but I mean, I coach people the horse will come against them and do that a little bit. And then they get in a big argument. They'll be, well, he did this. And I'm like, do you think the judge wanted to see that? And then do you think your horse really needed that as the correction? And remember, all of your corrections can lead, if you think about it, like we're going to have an argument about this, you can teach a horse to argue. A lot of times we get horses in here that have some bad history. And honestly, most of it, in my experience, is that people have taught them to fight, and they're good at it. Like, I mean, they some of them fight really well, but they're like, there's no foo-foo way around it. Someone's taught them how to battle. Very rarely on the horses that we start and break do we find that same issue. I'm not saying that they're all perfect either, but you certainly could understand where they're coming from when the things aren't going right. So all major corrections should be done in schooling, not at the show, unless it's going to result in a safety issue, because you cannot let something pass that is later going to be costing you, a potential, something seriously damaging.
We had that question in an office hours with Peter Gray as well. He's a dressage judge. He said the same thing. Like, this is not the time.
Right. He's really good at that. I mean, I usually am in the ring schooling, so it's like stupid, but
Yeah. All right. We got a question. What is your pre-cross country warm-up checklist?
Put on your boots.
Yeah. Make sure that your boots are at the barn when you need them.
Yeah, that works.
At the Olympics, they lost my boots before cross country. So like shipping there, nobody could find them. And I don't fit into a lot of people's boots because my feet are big and my legs are big. And so, until probably 5 minutes before I was to go get on my horse to go out on cross country at 6:04 in the morning, I had no riding boots. So I think the trick is, if it's a checklist you're talking about from that end of it, I think you have to have everything prepared in advance. So like all of my stuff tends to stay in the same place all the time. So I always know where it is. I'm terribly forgetful. So I just always try to put stuff in the same place so I know where it is, and I'll still lose it. And then if it's the horse checklist, I think you have to go through, the athlete you're trying to show up on to come out of that box on. I mean, and I think it has to be that clear. Not just what horse do I want to ride out of the box, but what horse am I bringing to the cross country, and how do I make him into the best version of himself? So Parker would rear and spin and behave like a lunatic at the start box. That was part of the checklist when it would go on, because he was just putting himself in the right place. He just sort of sat there on him. Other horses, you have to kind of sharpen them up, but you have to be aware of what you want. So like at the Worlds, when I was talking about that earlier, he was turned off by the time I got to the start box. And I was like, this isn't the same horse I've ridden for the last however many years. So I rode, probably didn't have to, because that horse never didn't show up on cross country. But I came out of the box and I rode a bit strong to 1 and 2, because I was like, hello, are you there? And of course he was, but I think you have to make sure that you know what you actually want to have underneath you. I don't want to be pulled to a fence. I was talking to a top trainer the other day, and they were saying how they always felt like if the horse was dragging them to the jump, that was great. It was a great sign. If I'm getting dragged to a jump, I'm going to argue about it, because I don't want to get dragged anywhere. I want to go to a jump because I decided to go to a jump. And but that's me. That doesn't mean it's for everybody. So you have to know that part of it. And then I think for me in the warm up for cross country, I want to make sure I always start with like a standard, normal jump, small jumps. I'd rather not make a mistake and have to go backwards in the warm up. So I always am very progressive in what I do. I don't tend to jump a bunch in the warm up, because I kind of feel better once I just am out on course and it's reacting to what's going on. But I want to do the angles that I'm going to have to do on the course. I want to do the narrow I'm going to have to do on the course. I want to do, the tables. I don't necessarily need to jump big fences in the warm up, because I don't think that's going to help me get better. So I don't necessarily spend a lot of time on that, but I will do more technical stuff to make sure that when I get out there, I've answered some of those questions. So let's say I've got to turn to the left to a narrow. In the warm-up, I would plan to do a similar turn to the narrow that might be provided in the warm-up, because that's just smart. You're kind of, you're answering the question before you get asked the question. So that stuff matters. You got a coffin early in the course, or a fence early in the course requires them to really get underneath themselves. I'm going to make sure I jump a fence on a wading stride. I'm going to make sure I do a forward ride, a waiting ride, and a stay the same ride to the warm-up fences, so I know I have all of those components. I don't just go and jump to jump fences. I jump with a purpose every single time I'm jumping a fence, and then you don't have to jump as many fences.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And it's just something that I wish I was always that thoughtful about my warm-ups when I was at competitions. So Courtney is wondering, you've met Courtney's horse at a clinic. She's got a chestnut mare who's a bit wild, and she is going to a mini trial this weekend. And she said that her mare enjoys a pretty minimal warm up with just 10 to 15 minutes of Courtney overly getting her on her aids, and only pop over 2 to 3 jumps before heading out to cross country or stadium. Courtney thinks she is enjoying finally being told what to do versus Courtney having to coast her to everything. but she's wondering if you have any thoughts on how she might approach a warm up at her mini trial this weekend with her mare.
Well, I think she hit it right on the head. She's found something that works, and so it'd be, and I've helped Courtney with the mare. She's a really beautiful little jumper, and they, I think what they are is they're a partnership, and that partnership has the good and the bad, and they are a little almost too married. And so Courtney needs to kind of go with I'm the adult in this relationship. This isn't a democracy. And then back away from it, because that mare seems to really kind of respond to that. So I would stick with the same warm up that you have found successful, because it would be silly to change that. And as I've talked about all these warming up things, I had a mare that I rode, the one that I'd have to ride that long for dressage. I wouldn't jump her before I go on cross country. Shannon White doesn't jump her gray horse before he goes on cross country. The Cooley Sharon White. Sorry, who did I say? Shannon. Sharon White. The Cooley on show horse. She doesn't jump him before cross country. She just gets on, warms him up in the morning, then goes out, stands over there, gets on, and goes. And I did a similar thing with one of my horses. I wasn't like, this is going to be awesome, but she just performed really well that way. So I'd go and do flat work somewhere, make sure she was physically warmed up, and then I just kind of have to deal with it, because otherwise it became, it just became a bit more of a nightmare with her. And she was kind of similar to your horse, Courtney. But my point being is the warm up for that horse.
Is everyone seeing them frozen?
Yeah, we lost him.
Real cliffhanger. There he is.
As your relationship progresses, just be ready to go, this is my new horse every day. Because I do think your horse is almost like 3 different personalities. So you can kind of, it keeps it interesting. You only need one horse then.
There you go. The silver lining. Stephanie asked a question. She's interested to hear how lower level, like maiden through novice pairs, she's interested to hear warm-up ideas for them prior to a one-day competition. And I'm not sure, Stephanie could clarify if she means like, I'm guessing she means day of, like prior to the first, Kinsey's nodding yes. Prior to the first phase.
So basically she's at a one day trying not to overdo the horse for the day, I'm guessing.
Yeah, maybe just how warm-up goes during that day.
I think one thing a lot of people don't think about at a one day is you get on and do your dressage, warm up and test. Then you go to jump. They don't need to warm up for 20 to 30 minutes before each jumping phase, because they already have done their warm up. And that is we see it all the time. And you're like, now you decided to come warm up for 30 minutes, and every other time you're doing 10, now you're here. So I think that's really important to keep in mind. Do your normal dressage warm up, but then realize for the jumping phases, you probably don't need that much. Just get on, get your eye, whatever everybody always says, get your eye in tune. But you don't need to go crazy into jumping. The flat warm up before jumping. If you need to jump more fences for your own sake, that's one thing. But
yeah, and so that's like Jen's absolutely right, because that's the other thing. Once let's say you show jump, and then you've got cross country that same day, you have jumped. Yeah. So you don't need to go through the whole process again. By the end of the day, your poor horse is just going to be like hating you. Preserve your horse. So at our one days with the younger horses, we treat them like, look, it's nice to win, but I'll take them in there. I want them to come home and have enjoyed the experience. And if I take an experienced horse to a one day, I want them to enjoy the experience. So I don't want to make like this big point of wearing them out. I'm going to warm them up less for dressage than I would in a normal competition, because I want to make sure at the end of the day the horse has more left to it. And so think of your athlete. If you've been doing 25 minutes of work daily on your, for the weeks building up to your show, and then you're going to do 25 minutes of warm up for dressage and a 5-minute dressage test. Then you're going to do 20 minutes of warm up before your show jumping. Then you're going to do 20 minutes of warm up for your cross country. Then you're going to stand on it and talk to your friends. That poor horse has now done, 2 weeks of work in that one day. Be respectful of your partner, get them prepared appropriately, and then use them appropriately. When you're running long distances, you don't run as fast as you can the whole time. You run to sustain yourself for a long amount of time. And that's the same thing for one day. So those young horses, sometimes it can be a bit more entertaining, let's say, as they're learning their way. Don't be worried about that. It's not, they have to enjoy themselves. It's like kids in school. They need recess. They need to be able to go to the show and take it in. And if I'm worried about them needing more mileage, I'm going to take them to jumper shows, hunter trials, derby crosses. I think those are fantastic. I think that's the best way to get horses prepared for most things. And dressage shows. I actually won't take them to dressage shows because I don't like dressage shows. But I'll take them places because I want them to have the experiences out there so that when I get to a regular show, I can ask of them what I need. So I hopefully that kind of gets the idea on what covers what you're asking. I'm not sure because there's lots of different ways you can warm up, but I think on a one-day event with a young horse, you have to factor in you want to spend 35 minutes, 40 minutes on them maybe altogether.
Yeah.
So use it appropriately. If you need more time for the cross country, you're still you might have to cut back on something else.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. So Holly is wondering, when you are coaching your students at a competition, and if you have a particularly nervous or, in Holly's terms, neurotic student, do you have an approach to how you coach them in warm up, or what you kind of recommend they do if they're on their own for warm ups?
I mean, again, that's a great question. Then the previous question, actually, I really like that question too, but this is a super question, but every one of them's different. I've been fortunate enough to coach a ton of people with doing young riders as long as I did. I coached a huge variety of students. I coached my own students. I coached other people's students. And because of that, I got to see so many different personalities and stuff. And the goal is you're trying to figure out what kind of person you're dealing with and then deal with them. But for an example of the neurotic thing, I had one girl who rode at Young Riders with me, I don't know, probably 6 times, maybe even 7 or 8. And she was a nutcase. And I mean, she was a good rider, had good horses and stuff, but she just would get into a state all the time. And the very last Young Riders we went to, she was in the 3-star. And I get a call from the barn, from the grooms, every about 2 hours. Oh my God, you got to come to the barn because she's freaking out. Her mom got her upset, and she's, oh my God, and then this and that, and I every time be like, nope, not coming to the barn, not coming to the barn. And then about 2 hours before her performance, an hour and a half before her performance, which we had the plan of when she was getting on. It's all written on a board because we want everybody to know they're getting on at 9:20, not get on sometime after 9. We're very specific in those competitions. I'd go to the barn. This happened every day, dressage, cross country, and show jumping. I'd go to the barn half an hour before she'd ride. I'd sit her down, and we'd talk her off the ledge. And then she'd get on, and she ended up winning a silver medal. She was unbelievable. And I remember coming over for that competition. I was like, the only reason it worked is because I knew her so well from the previous years. Otherwise, I would have gone to the barn every single time I got the call. And I would have gotten the next call anyways because she was going to go to the edge of the ledge every single day 5 times. I only needed to deal with it once every single day. But that is dealing with nervous, dealing with scared, dealing with really ready to go. You have to kind of get to know your students. It's not it's a little hard to pick up in just a warm up. Some people need to be kind of drawn in, and you almost take their focus away from everything. You make it on what you're telling them to do, and that's how they get through everything. And other ones you have to be careful. Like Jen's super good with the people we have, because I tend to get very and now this and now this and now this. And Jen's really good with the people that just don't. They need just that sort of chilling out, smooth, quiet approach. And so it works really well. And a lot of times if those athletes are self-aware, they'll say, yeah, I need Jen to be in the warm-up. I don't need you to be in the warm-up. And it doesn't offend me. I know know how I am. At the bigger shows, I try to be the person that is required of me. And the other shows, I try to get across what I want to get across, basically. So, if you find a coach that really gels with you and they understand you, then you're good to go. If you're coaching a huge group of people, a nervous person can be nervous for many different reasons. Everybody responds differently. When I'm nervous, I crack jokes. I just can't. I mean, I'm gonna be a smart ass. I'm gonna be flippant and all of that. And when I'm not that way, I'm not actually putting myself in the best place to compete. So my coaches need to know that as they're helping me. Now, if I get help from someone, most of them know pretty well that Kyle's going to say something that they're going to wonder why I would say that. But it's just the reality of how I process the stuff. So you should, same as your horse, you should become what that athlete needs, but not necessarily what they tell you they need, because that's the other problem is humans are they're not as self-aware as they should be. So they'll say, oh, I need someone that does this. And I'll be watching and be like, well, you need someone to stoke a fire because you're not getting anything done for the performance. Or they'll think they need all this stuff. And you'll be like, what you need to do is just settle down and chill it out. So your job is to be able to step back and kind of figure that out. And that might take, it might take a couple months. It might take a couple of years. And again, the athletes change. I had a top rider that rode with me, that rode at the 5-star level, that was just, a super rider. And she took her horse back down to intermediate, and we were at an event, and she was like in the warm-up for cross country. She was like, I had no idea she was as nervous as she was. And she burst into tears. And I was like, ooh, I have to go a completely different direction here, because this was a new person that was in front of me. It happens, you have an experience, good or bad, and it changes how you feel, and you need to be able to modify with that.
Yeah, and if that's a really interesting question, and if I'm sure Holly was asking for a friend, but anybody who is an anxious or nervous rider, one, you're not alone, because some of our top tracks on Ride IQ are people listening to Coach Ashley Johnson, she's a sports psychologist. She talks a lot about managing nerves. Kathy Barr has also addressed it. And Megan Marinovich-Burdick has a hack chat on it. Those are some of our top tracks. So one, you're not alone. Two, search the word nervous or search the word anxious in Ride IQ, and a lot of resources will come up from the sports psychology angle, or just, what's worked for other coaches. So if you want to kind of do that work, and then hopefully your coach is doing that work like Kyle's talking about too, be a match made in heaven.
Well, one other thing that actually comes to mind with that is when I was telling you about it at the World Championships, walking around the warm-up with Andrew Nicholson. We all know Andrew Nicholson, and he's about as tough as they come. He done badminton more times than anybody else and he'd ride anything. We're walking around the warm-up. And he turns to me, he goes, oh my God, he said, it never gets any better, does it? It's always nerve-wracking. And I remember, I was walking around, and I was thinking, yeah, my nerve-wracking day was yesterday. Today, I'm actually feeling pretty good about stuff. But it struck me that at that level, you're not alone. It's not that you have the nerves, or that you're worried, or your student is worried or is nervous. That's not the limiting thing. The only trick is to figure out who are you and how you get through it. Are you a preparer that everything has to be just right? I remember a girl I helped for a while. She would time how long it took to put her boots on. Everything was listed so that she never missed a sequence to get to the ring. She was really competitive, but she knew exactly who she was. Myself, when I was talking about my boots being gone at the Olympics, that was perfect for me. Me being late is me in the best competitive state because I'm distracted. I know that about myself. But you have to actually know that about yourself, your student, or whatever, and kind of work it in without it necessarily being, if that doesn't happen, I can't compete. So I think people often think that, oh, those riders are just brave and they don't get worried about anything. And it's just not the case. You just find that thing that gets you through it. And part of it sometimes is being an actor and being able to be, I'm going to be someone different today. So I'm going to be Andrew Nicholson when I ride this horse, because the way he rides is how I want this horse to go. Or I'm going to be, someone else that you might look up to, but you have to find that lightning, that touchstone that just goes, I feel good about this now.
I'm gonna be Kyle Carter today, and I'm gonna be Jen
Don't do
Carter
that.
tomorrow. All right, we have a bonus question that came from the private Ride IQ Facebook group. It's not related to warming up, but it's a great question, and it one, I think it's really interesting, but it also like warrants some elaboration beyond the Facebook group. So Catherine, I believe, is here. She asked the question, and she said, what are the best tips to keeping young horses relaxed on your home course? She said, my 5-year-old is really starting to learn the job and he loves it, which is awesome. But now he's getting really amped up when we go out to practice at home. I'm thinking I'll take a day to have a flat ride out there just to help him realize that not every day there needs to be so exciting. So other than just repetition and not letting him get away with his antics and speed, what advice do you have for this type of behavior?
Well, it's a great question, because I think a lot of people find themselves in that situation and then are like almost put off by doing anything. So riding in your show jump area with a horse that's that way, doing flat work around the jumps and all of that, I think is the best way to actually help fix the problem. The next thing is I would do your warm up in the area that you're going to jump. And then I would jump, say, 4 fences, and then I would do flat work again for 5-10 minutes. And then I would jump 4 fences, and I'd do flat work again, jump 4 fences, and then put them away. And then the next day, because you're not jumping that much, I don't like jumping back-to-back days, but maybe you're only going to jump 12 fences, 15 fences. You're going to then the next day come back out and do the same thing. So the horse doesn't get this idea. Like, jumping shouldn't be, it should be fun. It should be, the horse should get kind of like, this is awesome, but they should be respectful and they should do their job, because you don't see horses jumping around Kentucky, and those horses are keen and game and all that, but they are rideable because they're able to channel those nerves and that excitement into work, which means you have to teach them how to work in the environment and in that atmosphere that he's carrying. The other thing I think is super important with any horse that we have that's that way, and if you listen the Hudson lessons, because that horse is, I don't know if he's that way because he's like super excited about it or whatever. I got some ideas on why he's that way, but what I'll do with him is I'll do his jump school, and then with any horse that's in that sort of mental state, I always go and do 10 to 15 minutes of flat work afterwards, so that they start to realize that it's not such a big deal. And my coach at Spruce Meadows, Albert Cly, was actually the one that introduced me to that on a really difficult thoroughbred mare that I was riding. After she competed, she'd do the jump around, she'd go to the jump off, she'd be like completely beside herself. He'd make me go do flat work with her, and it changed her completely, because she started to realize there was actually communication going on. It wasn't jumping fences. And that's the other part, is you're going to jump 16 fences in a course. You're going to jump 16 fences, and you're going to canter 220 strides. It's the 220 strides that matter. So him getting excited is not an endorsement for him to be able to bolt to the jump. He can land, he can be playful. I think that's great, but it cannot be in a place that you can't get to the next effort. So with horses that are also that way, I will always, all of our horses, all of our courses here, from the lowest to the highest, every jump, there's another jump somewhere on the backside, so the horses start to land and realize they have to actually do something. And I think a lot of people spend their time just jumping fences, getting them to a certain height, then start adding that in. And a lot of horses just, you can't get them to pay attention, because you're not giving them anything to pay attention to. You must be more captivating than the jumps that you're doing. You must be more interesting than what he's thinking of is going on the backside. So jump a fence, do a circle the other way. And I'm not a big halter, because I always feel like the difficult thing isn't stopping a horse. The difficult thing is getting him into a canter that's balanced. So I try to use more turns. One other thing that I would try with a horse like that is I would jump 3 fences, and then have a sequence of maybe bounces on the course, some footwork pull exercise, have him go through that maybe twice, and then go jump 3 more fences. so that they start to think. If you think about how most people train, they usually do a grid or they do their footwork exercise, then they go jump their fences. And what you want him to do is you want him to jump his fences and never be certain when he's going to have to actually put his feet to work and apply his brain. So you must give him reasons to want to do that. You can't wait for him to just get there. You have to give him a purpose. So I would be doing tons of, I'd say I'm going to jump 12 fences today, but within those 12 fences, he's going to be doing so much flat work in between. I'm not trying to take his enthusiasm away. I'm trying to make his enthusiasm available so that when we get into the environment, he can perform for me. That's the goal, the key, the whole. And that's let's face it, you've got your horse, you like him, he's going, you're excited about what he's doing and you're excited about how he feels about it. You don't want to dampen that. But again, you don't see horses going to the Grand Prix ring running like banshees because they're excited about it. Those horses are just as excited about yours, but they've been educated to behave through that. So there's a couple of jump things actually there's two, I think, that are on Ride IQ that I did trying to get a horse to be more comfortable around the jumps. And there's a lot of explanations in the ride. I have a full show jump course set up and I'm riding around. I don't jump a single fence. I just do and work the jumps and explain why I'm doing it. So pull that one up and listen to it and ride to it. And I'm going to guess, because it's not like that was a one-off. That's something I did a ton with that horse. And he's a totally different horse now. It only took me a year and a half. So, I mean, God. But there's no rushing it. You can only teach them as fast as they learn. But make sure you're teaching them.
Yeah, totally. There's one warm-up you did that was on cross country where you're doing like circles around jumps. And then there's a spooky horse full ride where you were like you were choosing random jumps, but you were also doing flat work between the jumps. I don't know if that's the one you were thinking about.
Okay, I don't, maybe I jumped, but I didn't think I did. I thought I was just riding a horse that was spooking in the show, jumping and circling, but those probably would work. I thought it was Hudson, but it might have been Chucky. Hudson. Okay. Hudson usually is the horse that I would recommend when it comes to those sorts of things because he was in a difficult place and he's coming through it. So
yeah, you can just search Hudson in the Ride IQ app and all of the lessons that Hudson is featured in will come up. So those might be a good fit for your horse. Awesome. Well, you guys, we are a ways over the hour here, but this has been so helpful. I know I learned a lot. I know based on the comments that we've been seeing come in, everyone's learned a lot. But thank you guys so much for taking the time and sharing your expertise. And I think this is definitely a topic that we should continue to cover because it seems like there's a lot of questions and an endless amount of information to get out there.
Yeah, Courtney just said it was just circling fences. Courtney's we're gonna hire Courtney because she knows all of it. So
yeah, classic. Courtney, let us know which lesson that is in the chat, and we'll let everyone else know.
Yeah, she's the best. So yeah, no, awesome. I mean, thanks for having us on. And it is the stuff. We really do. This is stuff that pains us when we see it not being done. And so to be able to just kind of put it out there, and again, everybody agrees with it, but have a plan. Make sure that your plan fits you and your horse. Makes plans that happen at home that work towards the show. Make sure your shows aren't the biggest and most important things in your lives, because if they are, you're going to be in for a lot of disappointment. Make sure your experiences give you something to think about, positive and negative, so you can keep working on to the better things later. And that's an endless cycle of warming up, finding out how you warmed up, seeing how the success was on the horse, and then revamping, trying to improve on it, and then trying to perfect it.
It's a process, an evolution. And Courtney actually is going to find that lesson for us. I think she might be driving right now, but she said she's listened to it several times and she's going to post it to the private Ride IQ Facebook group. So if you're curious, look in the Facebook group. Kyle and Jen, thanks for taking the time to be with us. It's been an hour and 20 minutes now. And thank you everyone who provided questions, who tuned in, who is interested in this because you want to be the best partner for your horse. That is very cool. So
Pat your horse.
pat your horse and have a great evening. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Thanks,
Thanks.
guys.